Hi, this is Chandler Holloway, and I'd like to welcome you to the Startup Guide for RBK Mixer. This video is meant to be a supplement to the initial release demo, so I'm assuming you've already seen at least a little bit of that one to familiarize yourself with the purpose and feature set of the program. Before we get into the software side of things, I just want to provide a bit of background on registrations if you haven't used them before. Registrations on Casio keyboards are a lot like patches on a synthesizer. They capture the current settings of your instrument, such as tones, rhythms, effects, tempo, and other system parameters, and then store that information in a registration slot for instant recall with a single button press. Registration slots are organized in sets, or as Casio calls them, banks of 4 slots each. So with 8 banks to choose from, you can store up to 32 registrations total in the internal memory. That's a decent amount, but if you run out of slots and need to make room for new ones, you can export a registration bank as an RBK file for external storage. Now, this might seem like some pretty normal data backup stuff, but simply having an RBK file to mess around with is what makes all of this cool new functionality possible. You see, according to the manual, these are all the settings that you can store in a registration. There is plenty to work with here, but it's not a complete list. In reality, registration files contain additional parameters, like the volume level of the layered and split tones, that aren't accessible through the onboard controls. However, if you have an RBK file on your computer, you can modify these hidden parameters through software editing, and then apply those changes when you recall the registration on your keyboard. That's where RBK Mixer comes in. Editing these proprietary registration files is normally a pretty involved process, but RBK Mixer makes it much easier by organizing all the relevant settings in a straightforward mixer interface. However, before we can start tweaking registrations, we need to export a bank file from the keyboard so that RBK Mixer has something to work with. I'll be demonstrating with the CT-X700, but the process of creating registrations is more or less the same on the other models that are compatible with RBK Mixer, the CT-X800 and the CDP-S350. I've already set myself up with 60s E piano assigned to upper 1 and an electric bass on the lower split, along with some effects and a rhythm style. This is pretty close to what I want, but I feel like the bass sound is a bit too loud and it's overpowering the E piano tone up top, so I'll need to decrease the volume of the lower tone by editing a registration with RBK Mixer. To save a registration, hold down the Store button and then press one of the 4 registration buttons to store the current parameters. Now, this part is optional, but I'm going to go ahead and save these settings to the other 3 slots in this bank, which will ensure that my RBK file contains 4 copies of the same registration. I'll explain why this is useful later, but either way, now that I'm done setting up my bank, I'll need to export it using a flash drive or Casio's Data Manager software. I won't be covering the export process here because it varies from model to model, but I've included links to my tutorial videos on Casio's YouTube channel if you need to brush up on the fine details. Now that I have a bank file, I'll need to download RBK Mixer through the GitHub release page and run the installer. I'm on Windows, so I'll grab the MSI installer, but Mac users will want the DMG version. The installation process is pretty straightforward on both operating systems, but do note that this program directly edits files on your hard drive, so you may need to give it permission to install and run depending on how your particular machine is set up. It may take a little bit of time to boot up if this is your first time running RBK Mixer, but after that, it will load in the Mixer window. By default, you can only see the first 2 registrations, but you can always resize the window to view all 4 at the same time. So now we'll need to load in that RBK file we exported earlier. Click the Import button to open the File Explorer, and then choose the file you want to edit. The mixer window will update to show the tone names and volume levels for each registration. Like I said before, I think the bass is a bit too loud, so I'm going to decrease the volume of the lower tone using the corresponding volume fader. Even so, I don't want to make it too quiet, so I'll keep the volume at a respectable 112. That takes care of slot 1, but why did I bother making these 3 extra copies of the same registration? Well, because it saves you time if you have 4 options to choose from instead of just 1. A volume level of 112 is a reasonable guess, but I won't know if that's actually what I want until I transfer this bank back to my keyboard for testing. If I use these other 3 slots to configure slightly different volume levels for the bass tone, I'll be much more likely to end up with at least one registration that works for me. Editing a single registration and hoping for the best can work, but as the saying goes, don't put all your eggs in one basket. With all 4 dialed in, all that's left to do is choose a new name for the modified RBK file. Once that's done, click Export, and a little confirmation message will pop up to let you know where your new file was saved. Now you can take that file and transfer it back to your instrument for testing. I'm just going to quickly run through all 4 of these slots to see which volume balance sounds the best. I think I like the balance of the 3rd slot the most, so that's the one I'm going to keep. Right now, I have it saved in Bank 8, which I mostly use for junk and temporary storage, so I'll want to move it somewhere else. To do that, I'll recall slot 3, switch to a different bank, and then save these settings in a new slot for safekeeping. Adjusting the volume balance isn't the only thing you can do with RBK Mixer. You can also mute or pan the upper and lower tones to unlock some extra advanced functionality, but I've already covered those applications with my previous 2 demo videos on the utility banks. You can find a link to those videos in the description down below, as well as a link to the hub thread for RBK Mixer over on Casio Music Forums. That thread is a great place to ask for help, give feedback, or share custom registrations with other Casio users. Please consider subscribing to my channel for future tutorials or updates on RBK Mixer, as well as my other Casio software project, Restyle. This has been Chandler Holloway, project lead for RBK Mixer. Thanks for watching.